But yeah, then if I asked you all of the questions that I'd come up with over the last 2 weeks, we would be here till a week Tuesday, and I think that'd be a bit long for a pod.
Someone's got to edit this.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to Travel Tales from Beyond the Brochure, a podcast looking at unfamiliar places across the world and aspects of travelling you may never have thought of. I'm your host, the Barefoot Backpacker, a middle-aged Denby with a passion for offbeat travel, history, culture, and the whys behind travel itself. So join with me as we venture beyond the brochure. Hello. It's getting a bit chilly again here. Definitely autumnal vibes. I'm not at the stage where I need to put the heating on, of course, but we are in the I need to wear a jacket when I go outside territory. At least for a bit. Then the humidity kicks in and I get all sweaty. Have I ever told you how much I dislike the UK's dank autumn days? The weather almost behaved itself for the ultramarathon I mentioned in my last episode. Almost being the operative word. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the run overall, as I think it might be part of an upcoming storytelling vignette. All I will say about it is, compared with my last attempt, this one felt much easier, and I didn't take anywhere near as long to recover. Though I was a bit achy and slow on the Sunday morning, I was definitely mobile and not suffering too much. That it was only 50 kilometres and relatively flat probably helped. As for the weather, well, the forecast changed several times over the week before, and at one point it looked like it was going to be heavy rain all day. But fortunately, we just got coastal drizzle and a bit of wind. Not ideal conditions, but not entirely unpleasant, though it did get slowly worse over the day. And previous days' rain meant the mud in parts was very much unwelcome. One of my friends was doing the 100-kilometre version, and she got harder rain as the evening drew in. She didn't finish her run, very damp, until I was long asleep, much drier. Not a spoiler, by the way, but I did complete this one, and felt very comfortable, or at least didn't go through existential angst, for probably the first 43 kilometres. A better nutrition pattern definitely helped, and I have things to say about electrolyte energy gels and their effect on my body and my performance. Would I do it again? Probably, though I was definitely right to only do the 50k, and that's something to bear in mind for the future. I did manage to come home with a bit of a sniffle, so I've not done much outside since then apart from a few ambles to the supermarket. Our big news, though, is that we put our Christmas tree up last week, 23rd of September. Well, Laura did. It's her tree, not mine. I generally ignore Christmas. It's never been a day I think about, to be honest. But Laura, well, she loves Christmas. It's one of her favourite seasons. She has a tendency to be able to concentrate better when listening to Christmas music. But at the end of this month, she's moving to a very small apartment in London. My therapist is already aware, and she won't have room for her tree. Plus, she's away on holiday this year at Christmas itself anyway, so even if she could take a tree, she wouldn't be around for it at the opportune moment anyway. So she wanted to celebrate and enjoy the Christmas season with a tree when she was able to, so she still had the vibes this year, even if not at the right time. Given it's her tree, and given my general inaction to everyday life, it's likely that that tree will now stay up and in place until Laura comes back to visit me in, I don't know, mid-February maybe. It's kind of nice to have a bit of light and sparkly joy, especially now we've passed the equinox, so the darkness is longer than the daylight. When I posted about this on my Instagram stories, the most common question wasn't the one you'd think. In fact, it was referencing the fact that we've gone straight to Christmas and completely passed over Halloween. The thing is, she is very much a Halloween girly, but was brought up in a culture that really acknowledges it. She hates that the UK doesn't really celebrate it anywhere near as much. Otherwise, that tree would be laden with Halloweeny decorations, for sure. So yes, in spirit we're acknowledging it, but in practice, we've just gone straight to the big one. So, 100 countries in 50 years. It's the sort of thing that gets you an article in the Metro. I'm working on that. But in lieu of something with more reach, PLC, I'm doing a podcast about it instead. I don't know what 8-year-old me would have thought if you told him that when he was older he'd have been to over half the world. Honestly, I think he would have just been disgusted to realise that he was old. And not a he. But I'd like to think he'd have been proud of me. He would spend so much time reading atlases and encyclopedias, learning about what the world is, and memorising things like capital cities and countries, but strangely not the flags. As you know, the first country I set foot in outside my own was Denmark. Slightly unusual, I think, for a 1980s Brit of my demographic, who'd probably have been more likely to have gone to France, Ireland, or Spain. It never crossed my mind that nearly 40 years later it would have been the first of that many, though, as I've noted before, at the time there were far fewer countries and half of them were inaccessible to a Brit anyway, so I guess visiting every country and the like simply wasn't an achievable goal, so no proto-influencers were doing it. I never counted countries until recently, even when I first started to dabble in social media and speaking with other travel bloggers, who very much did. People would ask me, "So how many countries have you been to?" And I'd have to answer vaguely, along the lines of, I don't know, about 60 maybe. I did occasionally check, but I always ended up forgetting the answer pretty quickly afterwards. I guess it wasn't really that important. Like age, it was just a number. Indeed, the only reason it was ever that high in the first place was because I've always preferred visiting new places over revisiting old ones, though I will speak about that later with a little more nuance. In fact, the only reason I definitively started counting was precisely because I knew I was getting close to the round 100 figure, and I was interested to know when and where I'd reach it. Well, that, and I was closing in on my 50th birthday, and my flatmate and travel companion Laura was keen to have me hit 100 before then, just because it would be a cool thing for me to say that I'd done. This is why it seems like I've done some weird and intensive trips in the last couple of years to places I otherwise wouldn't have visited. When you only get short trips available because you work full time, you need to travel to places with a large number of countries in a small area. And I'd already visited the whole of Europe. Well, almost. There was one country in Europe I'd yet to visit. One of the nearest to where I lived, indeed. And it seems kind of appropriate that if I started this adventure in Denmark, my 100th country should have been Norway. And I'll be doing a specific episode or two on that trip later in the year. Of course, being truly on brand, if you know me, my adventures over the last decade, you'll know it really should have been Bolivia. I'm sure I can find an appropriate time to visit Bolivia. Possibly my 200th country. There might well be 200 countries by then. To acknowledge these milestones, I felt it made sense to do a podcast episode reflecting on the journey. But rather than just me talking about all 100 countries and giving a brief synopsis of my vibes for each of them, I decided to get my friend V to ask me questions about it. V's a great interviewer for this, partly because she is absolutely not a world traveller, so therefore finds it easier to ask the simple questions that I would just otherwise take for granted. Our conversation was recorded on video, on Zoom, and later this month an edited version will be available on our respective YouTube channels. The full audio version I'm also going to make available on my Patreon page. For the purposes of this podcast, I'm just going to take some selected questions and then give a bit of context. I hope you find it interesting. It was around 1999 when I looked at a map and set myself 2 targets to achieve before I died, both around travel. One was to visit every county and comparable second-tier admin area in the UK, a task made all the more difficult by successive governments changing what they were. I do not keep a track of this. That would be a full-time job. The other was to visit every capital city in Europe, not just every country, every capital, which you would have thought would have been much easier to track and complete, as, unlike countries, country capitals don't tend to change very often. As of recording this podcast, I am between 1 and 5 short, depending on your definition of capital, visit, and Europe. I have never been to Helsinki. My experience of Podgorica was a transfer for the best part of an hour in the bus station. And given some definitions of capital, I've only been through Den Haag on a train. In addition, I've been to neither Astana nor Ankara, neither of which are in Europe, even if a small part of their respective countries is. But then Europe is merely a peninsula of Asia anyway. So, if I'm having this much trouble with something as simple as European capitals, imagine how I feel about counting countries. And this was V's first question to me, because, well, when you say you've been to 100 countries, you kind of have to justify it.
It would make sense, I think, to start off by saying, for the purposes of you saying you've visited 100 countries in 50 years,
Yes.
what counts as a country and what counts as a visit?
A visit's easy. I'm taking the view that a visit is pretty much I have set foot in the country, I have been stamped into the country, and I have done something in that country. So, for instance, for a long period of time, I didn't count that I'd been to Germany, despite that I'd been through it for several hours twice on a coach, because all I'd done was literally transited it and been to a motorway service station. And I didn't count that as a visit because I hadn't
Reasonable.
really been there. But equally, and also obviously I don't count airport layovers because you haven't been in the country, you've just been in the airport. And most countries, if you transit in the airport, you don't even get stamped into the country. So there's a couple of countries that I've been to who's been and is a bit dubious. So, for example, I've been to Turkey, but my trip to Turkey was basically a 13-hour layover in Istanbul. So I've been to Istanbul. I have been to a lot of the museums in Istanbul. I have eaten in Istanbul, but my entire time in Turkey has been just 13 hours in Istanbul. So I've been there, but I haven't really been there.
So do you count that one?
Oh yeah, obviously. The most ludicrous is the 8 hours I had in Thailand between the Lao border and the Cambodian border. When I was sort of going through it on one coach, 2 minibuses, and the back of a motorbike. So I set foot in the place. I got stamped into the place. I ate in the place. I had a wander in the place. I didn't see anything particularly much in Thailand, but I'm counting it because I physically set foot in the place and I did things in the place and I bought things in the place. I will, however, for the avoidance of doubt, at some point go back to Thailand.
Mm.
So that's
I can't imagine you on a motorbike.
I did fall off within the first 100 meters.
That is very on brand.
It was a heavy backpack. But yeah, that's what I'm counting as a visit. I'm counting a visit as I've been stamped in and I've done something in that country. As
So
for
it
what
doesn't count if you've just been in the airport, but if you've left the airport, eaten something, having a wander around, that counts.
Yes, and it doesn't count if I've transited through like on a bus or a train.
Yeah.
There have been in the past countries I've done that. I've not set foot in the place. I'm not counting that. As for what counts as a country, that's a dubious issue.
Yes.
We all have our own definitions of country. For me, it is strictly for this, I'm basically going by independent sovereign states. Even that's a bit dubious. I am counting Kosovo because it's got its own entry and exit requirements, and if you go into Kosovo, that doesn't mean you've been to Serbia, because you still have to cross the Kosovo-Serbian border, and the Serbians don't like you doing that. So I'm counting Kosovo because it is a standalone entity. There's two aspects to this. There's de facto and de jure. De jure is what the law says about, what is a country and who owns a particular country, and de facto is what happens on the ground. I don't really care about the de jure situation. All I care about is, in practical terms, do I need to do anything different?
Or does it cause you any admin kind of way?
Yes. And that works either way, because there are certain countries that I haven't been to that there are breakaway states in where the admin is easier for the breakaway state, or traditionally was. Like Kurdistan was easier to get into than the rest of Iraq and things like that.
Is that just because Kurdistan was quite chaotic at the time and nobody really knew who was in charge of border control?
No, it's the opposite.
Oh.
Somaliland is another one, which is on my list to visit because Somaliland is more coherent than the rest of Somalia. But no one else recognises them as independent countries. So it's like Transnistria. Transnistria is one that I have been to that I'm not counting as a country, even though technically I probably should based on my own criteria. But I'm trying to keep it to just the sovereign states. So Kosovo is one of the two that are a little bit dubious. I'm counting Kosovo, but I'm not counting Palestine.
Why?
because one of the criteria that I've got for is it a sovereign independent country is, can it act alone without pursuant to a foreign power? And with the greatest will in the world, Palestine can't do a lot unless Israel tell it to. So while it's technically an independent country, and while it's technically, a member of the UN, in practical terms, it's not as independent as I would like it for the purposes of my counting countries.
Okay. So based on that same sort of criteria, you wouldn't count Scotland as a separate country?
No, because it isn't.
Yeah, but it's got not its own currency, but it's got its own money, it's got its own language, it's got its own cultural norms.
Yes.
And a lot of the people in Scotland see themselves as being a separate country.
Yes. And
it might have been easier to use Barcelona as an example there, actually, with Catalonia.
To be fair, there's no real difference between Scotland and Catalonia. And while we're at it, there's no real difference between Scotland, Catalonia, and somewhere like Alabama. Like the American states have a lot of independent power, but there's a lot of stuff that they don't control. So Scotland is not a country in the same way that, Minnesota is not a country. Where it gets dubious is Gibraltar and territories like that. I
was going to say, it gets a bit muddy in the middle there, because I would say that, even though it can't act independently, and I'm sure that I'll upset some people by saying this, Palestine to me is more of a country than Scotland is.
Yes, Palestine is more of a country than Scotland. I would say Gibraltar is more of a country than Palestine. What Gibraltar is,
British? We don't know. Okay,
and that's the problem.
That complicated?
I don't know why Gibraltar, the Isle of Man, Guernsey, Jersey, the Falkland Islands, the Cook Islands, Niue, aren't counted as independent countries, but they're not independent countries.
Right.
And I genuinely don't understand. This is the problem with counting countries. This is the problem with defining what a country is, working out the edge cases. I'm not counting Gibraltar. Others would.
But you've been to Gibraltar.
I've been to Gibraltar.
And you've been to Palestine and Scotland and a lot of the other places that we've just spoken about.
On my list is a visit to Guernsey and Jersey, which I'm hopefully going to do in December. So yes, it's all very. Other people will have different criteria than me. The criteria that I'm using might not even be consistent, but at least it's consistent in my head.
Yes.
The other complicated bit is if countries become independent or not independent. It's like, do I count the fact that I visited them when they weren't, and things like that?
Yeah. So that is an interesting one. That is.
So at some point, I will count Palestine. I just don't quite know when that is.
I've mentioned it before in an early podcast, but the concept of counting countries falls down when the countries themselves change. My task to visit all the European capitals also means I need at some point to visit Namur and Banja Luka, just in case future Europe sees both Belgium and Bosnia break apart, which, let's be fair, it's a distinct possibility. The question of have I visited a country if it didn't exist when I visited it is one for future me to ponder. At least when I visited Yugoslavia, the only country I've been to that no longer exists, I only visited Belgrade on those trips, and I've been there since. That said, my 100 countries doesn't include all three of Yugoslavia, the State Union of Serbia and Montenegro, which at the time I went in 2002-ish, was also called Yugoslavia, and Serbia, because that would be cheating. Related, it would be amusing to plot how many countries and equivalent I've been to historically, like Mercia, Austria-Hungary, Ashanti, Babylonia, and neutral Moresnet. I'm sure some German travel blogger would have made it their niche to have visited all the states that made up the Holy Roman Empire. That combination of the past versus the present, what's changed versus what stayed the same, would make a really interesting series of posts, actually. Regardless, I still don't know what to do about Gibraltar and similar places. They're not independent countries, but they're not independent countries. They're not part of the UK and their citizens need a visa or work permit to work in the UK, yet de facto they're seen as extensions of the UK. Within my lifetime we fought a war over one of them, and they don't have sovereignty. whatever that even means in the global world we live in these days. Anyway, I'm not counting Gibraltar, but it does mean that if it ever does become independent, hey, I can add a 1 to my country count without lifting a finger. In my conversation with V, this led to my usual rants about borders.
But
well,
yes,
that was going to be my next sort of question: is why? Why have we gone to 100? Did you set out to go to 100 countries, or do you just like traveling and it happened that way? Like, what's the why behind your travel?
the first time I counted countries, I realised that I was in the late 70s in terms of countries. I didn't really think of it because it's not that important to me. The only reason why I was counting to 100 was just because I wanted to get to 100 and wanted to see where my 100th would be. But I wasn't that mithered about it because, as you all may well know, I always have this historical thing about borders, and borders being a bit arbitrary and man-made and largely irrelevant. Not irrelevant, but
A social construct.
yes. So I don't really consider countries to exist is the wrong word, because we are dealing with a de facto situation, and they do, and borders exist, and that's very annoying, but also great for your passport. But I don't think about that side. I think of things in regions. So
Yeah.
I went around parts of West Africa for 5 weeks and went to 4 countries, but it was basically 2 or 3 regions and cultural experiences rather than 4 countries, based on the history and the culture of the area. Would I, for instance, this is going to get me into trouble.
Yay.
Is there an appreciatively enough difference between Germany and Austria? Or rather, there is a difference between German culture and Austrian culture, but is that culture at the border, or is that culture halfway up Bavaria? Is there a difference between French culture and Belgian culture and Dutch culture? There is. Where is that border? Is that border at the border of Belgium? Is that border in Belgium between Wallonia and Flanders? You know, it's these sorts of things. Like, have you been to France if you've not been to Paris? Have you been to France if you've not been to Toulouse? Have you been to France if you've not been to Paris, Toulouse, and Strasbourg? Is Strasbourg the same as Toulouse, or is Strasbourg close to the German city of Cologne in terms of culture? This is how I feel about countries and country counting, and everywhere is interesting and everywhere is different, but that everywhere is interesting isn't defined by its border. It's defined by its culture. It's defined by what is there, what is in that place, who lives in that place, who they are, what they eat, what the history of that place is. Like, France is a big country, and Strasbourg has a very different history and culture than Toulouse does. They're both French, but are they?
I mean, again, wars have been fought over what and where Strasbourg is, but that's a tale for someone else's podcast. And yes, what does it mean to be French? Especially given that Breton, Basque, Corsican, Occitan, Burgundian, etc. are all cultures and concepts that did, and still do, exist. Are nation-states simply an imposition by one small culture on a much wider area than their original influence covered? Or are they a combination and blending of all the different cultures contained within their sphere of influence? Can a country even be said to legitimately exist, conceptually, without the use of coercion, either overt, like you will recite our tagline every morning before you start work or school, here, have a flag, don't like it, here's the barrel of a gun for you, or covert, yeah, this side of the river you pay us taxes and we make the place clean and functional, that side of the river we don't collect the bins, we don't repair the roads, not our problem. Sometimes it feels that countries only exist because a small number of men get off on having a large amount of power and wealth and are able to manipulate people to serve their needs by giving them just enough to not be too angsty about it, and then ensuring that they blame someone else, likely another country or culture, or at least from another country or culture, rather than them. But what do I know? I'm just a travel blogger. In the previous section, I just spoke about countries and borders and power and money. In my chat with V, she asked me one of the most interesting and honestly hardest questions I've been asked. It would have been a bit easier if I'd have had time to ponder it, but I wanted to go into the chat completely fresh. As such, I probably could have answered this a bit better, but these were my first thoughts.
I watch your channel quite a lot, and I listen to your pod quite a lot. And
Someone's got to.
you have talked. You've spoken before about colonialism, colonial history, the damage that is done by colonialism, right? What is the functional difference between you and somebody, say, 200 years ago that's traveling all around the world and whatnot?
I'm not
Doing
going
all
in. I mean, functionally, the main difference is I'm not going in with Bibles. Yeah, I often think about this. Obviously, there's a difference between the explorers and the later actual colonialists who tended to wander in, be British, have a big house and just go, I don't know what's going on around here. I'm just going to stay in my resort and not talk to the local people and not eat the local food. And, you know, don't know anyone that does that. But some of those early, it's quite interesting, some of those early colonialists, the early colonial explorers who were just sort of visiting parts of the world that we in the West did not know much about and just chatting with the locals and getting lots of information about it so that we could then go in and destroy the place afterwards. We've already destroyed the place. There's nothing left for me to do.
There's nothing left to loot.
There's nothing left to loot. It's like the old joke, why the pyramids in Egypt? Because we couldn't take them back to the British Museum because they were too big. We tried. But there's a couple of aspects to this. And I'm not going to say I do this perfectly, because clearly I do not. Obviously, there's a whole feeling about I'm going to a place that's very much been dominated by people like me, and I have to be a little respectful about who I am and what I say when I visit these places. But I'm not thinking of what I say when I'm there. It's things like you can't compare. So you can't go into somewhere and go, oh, this is a bit shit.
It's all right to say that about your own home country, but it's rude to say it about someone else.
Yes.
So you're a guest.
Yeah, a lot of it is economic, some of it is political as well. It's very much a case of the baselines are different. We shouldn't be comparing our culture with their culture. We shouldn't be comparing our development with their development. They do things differently, and that doesn't mean that we are always going to be superior. I have been on buses in West Africa. It is an experience. It is not something that would work in Kirkby and Ashfield. I'm not saying that Kirkby and Ashfield is worse. It's just different. They're a different breed down there.
Again, you're allowed to say that you're from there.
I mean, I say bad things about Luton all the time, and I'm not from Luton.
That is true, but to be fair,
so
there
does
isn't
everybody
a lot
else
to say about Luton.
doesn't have a tourist board. So yes,
Shocking.
I am very conscious when I go to some of these places that I stand out. Let's be honest. Tall, white envy, purple hair, painted toenails. I am hairy as well. I am distinctive, and it is very obvious where I'm from, and it is very obvious who I am, and technically it is very obvious what I represent. And I have to make sure that my behaviors and my attitudes do not reflect that, because it would be very easy to go into a place and go, oh, for example, it's like affluence. It's like, travel privilege is a thing. And obviously, it is a lot easier for me to visit places like Burkina Faso than it is for people from Burkina Faso to visit Britain. And I'm also conscious that I'm more affluent than the average Burkinabe. So what would be not good is for me to go into Ouagadougou and go, I've got all this money, let's just throw it about. Because that would, not be good.
Very crass.
It would be very crass. It would be very insensitive. And there's also the question of what I talk about when I talk about places like that, what I show, what I take pictures of, what I choose not to take pictures of.
Have you ever been visiting somewhere and you've had a sort of sudden horrible realization of, oh shit, I'm doing a poverty tourism right now?
There were certainly places in Lomé in Togo that I actively chose not to take pictures in because I did not think it was appropriate. Because that's how it kind of felt. I was kind of wandering around the city and went, hang on a minute, this is not, I don't belong here, and this is not the sort of thing that I really should be. I'm not a journalist. Well, I am a journalist, but I'm not that sort of journalist. I'm not going into these places with the specific remit to discuss the problems of life there. I've seen some things that don't need to be talked about for that very reason. I am not the right person to be having those conversations. I am not the right person to be talking about these sorts of things. I'm just a travel blogger who is exploring the world one intersection at a time. And sometimes I have to be careful about how I report and how I say and what I say and how I say things. Because objectively, some places are going to be less aesthetic than others. Some places are going to be, some places are going to, yes. Some places are going to be run down. Some places are going to be not great. And I certainly have a duty to give my thoughts and my experiences and my feelings about a place. But I've got to be very aware that my feelings should not be influenced by the fact that I live in England. I need to be more practical.
Being a British citizen, you are probably one of the, I'm not saying that you're one of the elite super rich, but living in the UK, even those of us that are quite poor are probably in the top 5% of people that earn in the world, yeah? Do you ever feel sort of guilty when you're visiting a place that is a lot poorer than you're used to at home? Well, not guilty, but do you ever struggle with your own privilege in that way is probably what I'm asking you.
Probably less than I should. But I have a tendency to kind of try and switch off and just, oh, I'm in a new place. Let's see what this new place is like without kind of thinking about things. So I just go, well, this is what it's like. I have essentially, I suppose in my head, what I'm trying to do is not compare. I'm trying to not compare things. I'm trying to not compare places. So I'm going into somewhere and I'm going, this is unlike anything I've been before. And that's the end of my thought process. I then just see that place for what it is rather than for what it isn't in that respect. And there are things that take some getting used to, but they're very much everyday things that if you're not used to something, then they're going to be tricky to get used to. Things like, how to take a bus. It's something as simple as that, how buses work, how shops work, that sort of thing. Just because it's different doesn't mean it's worse or better.
I've been thinking about this, and I'm still not sure what my answer is. There's definitely a whole vibe in travel literature to slightly demean and underplay places that aren't like home, and much of that would be rooted in an undercurrent of cultural superiority, which is hard to counteract if you're not used to challenging yourself. Even something as simple as budget. Saying somewhere is cheap might well be factual, but needs to be treated with nuance lest it's perceived that you're being derogatory. What's cheap for you might not be cheap for the people who live and work there. And that's especially true as a tourist who might not be buying the same things as the residents. This is also the problem with all those most expensive places to live, and especially to immigrate to, lists. They may not factor in things like relative average wage, or where certain specific costs like accommodation are affected by local factors like rent caps, while other costs are allowed to roam free, which as a tourist you're not going to see or know about. Ultimately, each destination needs to be seen on its own merits, and comparison is the thief of manners. I will say, though, that the very act of travel makes these easier conversations to have. Fundamentally, it's far too easy to dismiss as stupid or even scary something that you've never seen, never experienced, and don't understand. But the best way to experience that is on your own terms. By forcing people to face what they don't understand and only have hearsay knowledge of, you might in fact end up validating their perceived fears. Whereas by getting people to experience it at their own pace, in an environment they've chosen, but also one which is more natural, it's much easier to go, oh yeah, this makes a bit more sense. And they come to, no one likes the traffic in Dhaka in Bangladesh, but going there and seeing it makes you appreciate the base behind the impressions that people have of it and the give of it. And these are true domestically as much as internationally. The entire concept of, for example, England's north-south divide is one that, on many levels, is the basis for a lot of sneering and othering, from both sides, I may add. And while much of this is done humorously, it can't be denied there is an undercurrent of genuine dislike and resentment. And this amongst two groups of people who, if you're looking at it externally, are almost exactly the same. And if you take this and extend it logically, you realise that if people from Grimsby don't like Guildford, imagine what they think of the people from Ghana. Not everywhere is great, and yes, I've been to places that I've actively disliked. But as I say, I tend not to talk about them, or at least those bits of them, for these very reasons. That said, it would be remiss of me to say that every travel I've done has been to lovely, pretty, comfortable places, and I'll briefly come on to places I've visited and actively disliked at the end of this pod. I am also fully aware of my ongoing disregard of Luton, and one might argue, but surely, if you're not going to talk derogatorily about Lomé, how do you feel allowed to talk about the same about Luton? And I guess my only defence is, having lived in the likes of Coventry and Kirkby and Ashfield, and spent considerable time in less salubrious parts of cities like Sheffield, Birmingham and Glasgow, I don't feel that dissing Luton is in any way me punching down onto a more deprived place. Rather, I'm just more side-swiping at places that are the same but different. If I'd have been from the Luton area originally, I'd have probably ended up saying exactly the same things about Mansfield for exactly the same reasons. Some places are shit, but they're my shit. V's next question led on from that and was about cultural norms and manners. Because while respecting your destination is an important aspect of travel, it doesn't start and stop with what you say, but also contains what you do and how you're seen. And it would be very colonial to wander into somewhere and assume you can just act the way you do at home.
Obviously, there are different cultural norms of food around the world, and there are different cultural norms of manners around the world. I know from a recent trip of yours that you will eat the things the locals eat, even if they're not things that you would maybe normally eat in the UK. Do your cultural behaviours and the things that you will or won't do or will or won't eat or whatever change depending on the place that you are? Do you try and fit into the manners and the food tastes and things of the local people, or are there certain things that you're like, it doesn't matter where I am, this is just how I do that, or it doesn't matter where I am, I just wouldn't eat that?
I remember a conversation I had with my friend Layla back in 2006 when we were in Mongolia at the time, as you do. And we were just having a conversation and we were trying to reel off all of the cultural norms in our respective countries because she's French, brought up in Tunisia, but French. And we were just discussing all of the cultural norms in our respective countries and going, well, that's a bit shit, isn't it? Why do we do that? It's a bit weird. So I'm not the best person to look about cultural norms for because I try and avoid them in Britain. There are so many things that we do culturally in Britain and I just go, why are we doing that? What is the purpose of that? What is the point of that? Elbows on tables. I have no problems with putting elbows on tables because that's what tables are for. That's what elbows are for. My understanding of that one is because back in the olden days, it was seen as aggressive behaviour. You know, when you're all sitting around a table and everyone's got a knife or an axe. So it prevented fights amongst Vikings.
I think a lot of table manners are just there to stop you being hit by flying bits of other people's cabbage or whatever, and that's fine. And I don't mind adapting them to wherever I happen to be at the time. But I do think for me personally, there are certain things that I wouldn't eat, even if it was the most eaten thing in that area. Or there's certain ways that I might not behave even if it was at the norm there. For example, you just mentioned France there, and it's my understanding, which may be completely incorrect, that topless beaches are a big thing in France, right? But if I was in France, I probably wouldn't get topless on the beach because that would feel weird for me personally. Have you had any things like that where you're like, oh, everybody's doing this thing, but that's really not something that I want or feel comfortable doing?
No, I don't think so. Or at least I've never noticed, because I'm kind of, oblivious to all of these sorts of things, because I don't pay any attention whatsoever.
It might be a drawback in being a travel blogger that's not a travel blogger.
I have far fewer conversations with people than travel bloggers really ought to do, which is annoying when you're trying to tell stories, because people make stories. There are certainly some cultural norms are explicit, like sort of clothing requirements in temples. There's not really any way of getting around those. You wouldn't want to get around those anyway, because that would be disrespectful.
Yeah.
There's a whole host of lesser attested cultural norms that you should be aware of, especially things like, you shouldn't turn your back on the Buddha and things like that, which is easier said than done when it's a small alcove, a small temple, narrow door. But be respectful, do what you can. And I think as long as you do what you can and that you're seen to be doing what you can to meet those norms, no one's going to expect to know everything. I don't know everything about British cultural norms. I genuinely don't. But I'm taking the view that the ones that I don't know about probably aren't relevant.
Neurodiversity.
Logic and practicality is more important than weird, ridiculous social norms that mean nothing. We just do them because...
So it has to make sense to you.
It has to make sense to me. Tism.
I'm saying nothing.
But in Britain, it's my place to have those conversations. It's not my place to have those conversations in a foreign country. No one can look up exactly what every single cultural norm is. You just have to be aware of the normal ones. And hopefully there are things that if I don't know and I do something, someone would actually point it out. Okay, I didn't know that. Like sort of certain hand signals mean different things in different countries.
See, if you got that wrong in Britain, we would just tut at you. No one's going to tell you. We're just going to tut and huff and go, ugh.
Yep. And just because a beach is topless doesn't mean you have to be topless.
Yeah. I couldn't think of a decent example, actually.
No one needs to see me topless. Absolutely nobody.
Yeah, I'm quite boring. I've never climbed up a sacred mountain and danced naked on it. I've never made out on an Arabian beach. I've never paddled in an Italian fountain. And yes, while a lot of social manners and norms are quite silly when you think about them, ultimately some others are rooted in either common sense or in historical culture. You take your shoes off in Svalbard restaurants because when it was a coal mining area, everything was covered in black dust, so it ensured that inside places didn't get too dirty. There are no coal mines in Svalbard anymore, but people still do it anyway. You don't talk with your mouth full because, well, for one, it makes it less clear what you say. Two, objectively, watching someone eat isn't terribly aesthetic, especially when you're eating yourself. And you don't dance naked atop sacred mountains for reasons too numerous to list on this podcast, and if you don't realise at least some of them, you really have no business travelling. As a follow-up topic, V then asked me about food, partly because food itself can be a cultural minefield.
You see, I know you've eaten some fairly outlandish things in your travel times.
Yeah, the weirdest thing I've ever eaten was probably the deep fried chicken's feet in Laos.
That doesn't seem weird to me. People eat chicken here, so that's...
Yeah, but not chicken's feet, because they're basically cartilage. They're not...
Yes.
There's not a lot of meat on them. It is just very chewy and...
All food that comes from poor origins is always the bits of meat that the rich people didn't want to eat, though. And some cultures can make some really good food out of that.
Have you ever had tripe?
I have had tripe before I was vegetarian, and it may have been part of my decision-making process to become vegetarian. But
I mean, are you saying the north of England is a deprived location? Actually, don't answer that.
Let's not. Have you ever eaten anything where you thought they definitely only give this to tourists to see if they can make us eat it. There is no way that people actually eat this for fun, on
Tripe.
purpose.
I once had a fish eye, which was one of the most disgusting things I've ever had in my life.
I can imagine texturally that would not be pleasant.
No.
I guess it's probably got quite high levels of protein and stuff in it, but
I don't know, and I'm not going to find out again. That was, I mean,
taste it.
yeah, we had a huge fish in Tunisia, like one of those restaurants where there is nothing on the menu. It's just whatever we catch today. So there were like 4 of us, and we all had this huge dorade, and allegedly fish eye is a delicacy. I have my doubts. Most of the things that I've eaten have been culturally appropriate for the location, if slightly unusual to the tastes of a refined British girl. Like you. For example, in Central Asia, I had an awful lot of, or at least more than I wanted, things made with horse milk, and horse milk is, as milks go, it's one of them.
Is it gamey? I feel like it would be gamey.
The milk is just milk, and we had horse milk yogurt, which was not, I did not like that, and we had these sweets made of horse milk that resembled gobstoppers and they basically had the texture of a small neutron star. They took a lot of sucking, and I've sucked a lot of things, and I was not impressed, and I will not be trying that again. And I know you're desperate for me to talk about my food in Norway.
No, I wasn't say a word about the disgusting things you ate in Norway.
Whale was not disgusting. It tasted like venison. And the seal steak that I had was a bit like pork and had the texture of a chocolate cake. And I would have it again because it was lush.
Fatty? Was it very fatty?
Yes.
I feel like seal and whale would both be very, very fatty.
Yes, they are. And that's quite a good thing, because nothing else grows up there. Yeah, nothing grows up there. So you have to have the energy.
Keep you warm.
Yes, absolutely.
Is there anything that you would say, no, I'm absolutely not going to eat that? Like, primate or anything like that?
There are things that I do not like. And I've put a lot of disgusting things in my mouth, but there are things that I do not like. I don't like carrot. I don't like I don't like dandelion and burdock. I don't like tequila. I don't like orange.
I'm surprised you don't like tequila. I can imagine you doing tequila shots. You like your booze.
I'm not a spirity person, really. I'll do whiskey, but only because I feel contractually obliged to do whiskey. But I'm 63% Scottish by descent, so I kind of feel
that's very precise. 63%. Did you get a DNA test or something or did you literally work that out for yourself that you were 63%? This is
5/8 of my great grandparents.
That would have been maths that I couldn't do.
Yeah. So there are things, but at least when you're going to a lot of places, there at least is a choice about what to have. There are certain parts of the world where you don't. You just walk into like a small family-run cafe and you just dump things on your table and you just eat them. But usually they're quite benign. So, for example, in Southeast Asia, a lot of that is noodle-based. In West Africa, a lot of it is rice-based, or strange things involving pounded yam or cassava, which has the texture of mashed potato. It has the look of mashed potato, and it's slightly spongier and thicker than that, and you use it like bread. So you sort of scoop it up, and it's very nice. Just takes a bit of getting used to. But
I might struggle with that texturally because I'm very texture averse with things.
yes,
And so that's what would worry me actually about trying all the new foods, is not knowing what to expect from the texture.
yes. I mean, I go in and don't expect anything really. I'm just going, oh, that's nice. I've never had that before. That'll be interesting. Oh, I like the flavours of that. That sounds nice. Let's go for that.
So, having been to 100 countries in your lifetime so far, is there anything that you can point to as being a sort of universal human behaviour? Like, is there something where wherever you go in the world, people are going to be doing that?
Deep frying pastry. Everywhere has a sausage roll. Everywhere has a samosa. Everywhere has an empanada. Everywhere has a small handheld foodstuff that is basically deep fried or deep baked bread filled with something. It is the archetypal snack food.
Like, is that? I know, like, Cornish pasties were invented to give the miners something to eat, and they throw the crusts away because that's what they've been holding with their dirty hands. It's small, it's transportable, it stays warm. Has every culture got that for the same sort of reason?
I don't know if they got it for the
Because
same
it's
sort of reason. Yeah, I don't know if they got it for the same sort of reason, but they've certainly got the same kind of handheld, easily portable, very energetic snack.
So a universal human experience is the humble sausage roll.
The universal humble experience is something akin to the humble sausage roll, or some places do it better. Yes, that there
Well,
is.
now I want to go for eggs.
Yeah, except France. There is always an empanada. There is always a samosa. There is always, and what they put into it and the flavors they put into it are obviously very different and very regional. But there is always something that you can eat on the move, on the go, quick, easy, simple, tasty.
Now, have you ever been somewhere where you think, oh, this place does a different country's food really well? Because,
Yeah.
like, you've been to China. Chinese food in China is nothing like Chinese food in the UK. Like, have you ever been somewhere and go, oh, this culture actually does this cuisine better than they do? Or, as good as?
I always said that the best country to go to food is the United States, because they generally have the second best food of any culture in the world. So if you want the best Italian food, you go to Italy. If you want the second best Italian food, you go to the USA. If you want the best Chinese food, you go to China. If you want the second best Chinese food, you go to the USA. If you want the best Mexican food, you go to Mexico. If you want the second best Mexican food, you go to the USA. There are, like, Mexican food in Britain is not good. Obviously, we go back to colonialism, there is a certain colonialist aspect to it. So, for example, obviously, the UK does some relatively good Indian food. But, and this is the thing with the USA as well, where you've got a historically large group of immigrant population that have then settled in a country for a number of generations, what you end up with is a hybrid fusion type food. So,
Like tikka masala?
Yes, which famously invented in Glasgow, that highly Indian city. So you end up with food that pardon?
I thought it was invented in Bradford.
No, it was Glasgow.
But I don't. I might be thinking of a different curry-ish
Possibly.
dish.
I mean, Balti is a particularly Birmingham dish, for instance. Neither of them are particularly Indian. So what you end up with is sort of like almost like a third cuisine style that's ubiquitous and famous, but it's its own thing. It's like Italian pizza is different from New York pizza, which is different from Chicago pizza. Obviously, Mexican food is different in Mexico than, say, for example, Tex-Mex food is different, which is different from whatever the shit we have over here is.
When I come to do my podcasts on Norway and Svalbard, I'll talk a bit more about the ethics and morality about eating things like seal and whale, as they'll make more sense in that context. But ultimately, I'm comfortable with the moral and ethical choices I made. They're not endangered, apparently, and they're at least locally sourced. Not much else is on Svalbard, because it's hard to have an agriculture sector at 78 degrees north when your town is built on permafrost. There's also the question of respect here in regards of eat what and where the locals eat, rather than assuming everywhere's going to have a Greggs and a Starbucks and going there constantly during your trip. But, and I've certainly mentioned this before, it all falls down a bit when you look at your own country and culture, and, well, if you were a tourist going to the UK and you ate where the locals ate, then you'd just be likely going to Wetherspoons and getting a Chinese takeaway rather than anything else, which I guess is culturally representative of the UK, but in places like Sutton in Ashfield, it's not going to be exactly the high point of your culinary experience of the country. I couldn't tell you which country I've been to that has the best food. I will always speak highly of the Eastern Mediterranean and their love of things like hummus and kebabs, but of course I'll not hear a word against a thick curry or a very flavourable stir-fry in a sauce I'd love to replicate, or a slow-cooked barbecue or a spicy peanut stew. Every food is great in the context that it's eaten in. And this even goes for the street food, the greasy burgers, the deep-fried locusts, the dehydrated and very chewy slugs, or the fatty fries with a choice of 30 sauces. Have I had any bad food? For sure, but the squid in Cambodia was my own fault, and the kumis in the ex-Soviet Union is a popular taste I didn't grow up with, and therefore one I've not acquired. I have never had lutefisk, though. Sometimes you know what you're getting yourself into. Hello! It's time for a mid-episode break. Half-time, 7th inning stretch, that sort of thing. Put the kettle on, grab a snack, get comfortable. I'm just here to remind you ways in which you can get in touch and help this podcast out. You probably know this already, but in case you don't, the best way of supporting this podcast is to join my Patreon. For as little as a pint of beer at Wetherspoons every month, you can get a shout-out on this podcast, get occasional exclusive content, and other benefits. This podcast is going places, and wouldn't you want to say you were there before it was cool? The Patreon link can be found at patreon.com/traveltalesbeyondbrochurepod, and it's also in the show notes. The second best way is to appear on the pod yourself. If you sign up to my newsletter, you'll be able to see what episodes are being planned and see which you'd like to contribute a voice recording for. It's also a great way to keep in contact if and when the social medias undergo a lingering heat death. Newsletters should come out in the first week of each month, and sign-ups can be found at barefoot-backpacker.us14.list-manage.com/subscribe. There's another link in the show notes, in case that was a bit wordy. I'm a big fan of promoting fellow content creators and podcasters. If you've got a podcast or vlog trailer you'd like to hear featured in this spot, drop it to me and get yourself heard around the world. Now, on with the show. My chat with V generally revolved around more in-depth, intellectual or interesting questions that required thought. But there is an obvious elephant in the room that I feel it's time to address. The most obvious of obvious questions that someone who's been to 100 countries is probably obliged to answer.
I know that you said earlier that you don't like to sort of categorise places and you don't want to sort of go somewhere and then go, oh, that was rubbish. But I have to ask you, it'd be remiss not to, what your best and worst countries were that you have visited.
That's a very cheesy question. Very cheesy question that everybody asks.
Yes. That's what I've got to ask you, really. I would feel like I'd forgotten something if I didn't.
Best countries, I mean, I would always say Benin, I would always say Albania, I'd always say Belgium, and I'd always say Kyrgyzstan.
Why?
Because they're interesting, they're cultural, some of them are quite pretty. None of that applies to Belgium. But yeah, Benin is very cultural, very historic, and very interesting. Kyrgyzstan is just very beautiful, very eco-touristy, and they're very pleased to see tourists go there and be respectful. Albania is just very nice, very sort of compact. There's a lot to do in Albania. And Belgium just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, but they have really good beer.
Is that where you went to the beer spa?
No, that was the Czech Republic.
Berlin.
Yeah, that was that was in the mountains in the Czech Republic. That was where I drank an awful lot of beer.
Yes. So those were the best. Are you avoiding the worst? We can avoid it if you want.
I'm not avoiding the worst. And everywhere is interesting, and everywhere has a reason to be, and everywhere is cultural, and we shouldn't be dismissing a place just because it doesn't meet our expectations. We shouldn't be dissing a place because even though we go there, it's not. We don't have an enjoyable time. And there are certainly quite a few countries that I've been to where I haven't enjoyed my time there, but most of the time that's been because of me, not because of the country. So I had an absolutely dreadful time in Ethiopia, but that wasn't because of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a fantastic country. I just wasn't up with it at the time. And I had other things going on in my mind, and I was getting very socially anxious and stuff. Similarly, Indonesia, which is one of the best countries I've been to, but also I only had 4 days there because I panicked and then went home for reasons that I've discussed many times on my pods. Italy is a country that I've not really clicked with ever, and yet seem to go there about like it's my third most visited country. Do I know? Possibly. But every single time I've been there, I've gone, this is a bit weird for me. I'm not sure I like this. And then I still go back because that's a me issue, not an Italy issue. So there are very few places in the world where I've been and I've gone, actually, this is a bit shit. For the record,
have you ever expected? Sorry.
Well, have I ever expected what?
Have you ever expected somewhere to be not your sort of style of place, but when you've got there, you've had a real good time?
I mean, most places I go to, I think are like that, in a sense. The Caribbean, I quite liked my time in the Caribbean, but small Maldives, small hot islands in the middle of nowhere are on my generally I do not go to these places list, and there's a reason why I don't go to them.
You did a blog post a while ago called your fuck it list with places that you would rather die before you go, and I'm pretty sure the Maldives was on there, but you've since been.
I think the Maldives may have been on there. Mauritius, I think, was the one I actually highlighted, but Maldives may have been on there. Philippines was on the original one, and I've been to the Philippines now. Japan is on there, and I think Japan is on there. South Korea is on there. And yet, at some point, I will probably visit both Japan and South Korea.
Sounds like you need to update that list.
Yeah, that's what life is. Life is about exploring and expanding your comfort zones. I did a podcast on comfort zones. Life is about expanding your comfort zones and taking on new information, developing it, and rolling with it. Because nowhere, even Luton, nowhere is decrepit enough, dismal enough to be completely dismissed out of hand. In answer to your question, though, North Macedonia is
right.
the country, I think, of all of the places I've been to, has been the one that I have been least taken with, because I found it to be quite dour, quite miserable, quite unassuming, and even the pretty bits.
Did that not make you feel at home?
Well, no, because if I wanted to feel at home, I'd move to Seattle. It was raining, actually, to be fair. Almost my entire time in North Macedonia, it was raining, and it was October, so it was quite grey. So I did kind of go there at the wrong time. But equally, Skopje is not a pretty city. And there's not... It's one of those places where it's got things in it where the surrounding countries have the same but better. So, yes. If anyone's listening from North Macedonia, try and convince me otherwise. Or... maybe it's a Luton situation where even the people from Luton go, yeah, I wouldn't go to Luton.
Where's next on the list? Or are you done now? Have you gone, I've done 100, that's it?
In the run-up to getting 100 countries, me and my friend Laura was desperately planning to do trips to encompass, trying to get as many countries as possible, which is why we ended up in the Caribbean, because we managed to nick off 3 countries quite quickly. It's also why we went to Maldives, because they were just there, and it's another country off the list. So I have done quite a lot of countries in the last year and a half. I no longer need to do that, so I'm not planning things. I mean, obviously Laura is planning things for our trips, but not every trip I do is with her. We don't know where we're going next, because we're still sorting that out, surprisingly. But it might be Guyana and Suriname, or it might be Thailand and Cambodia. We don't know yet. Obviously, I've never been to Guyana or Suriname. I have been to Cambodia, and I have been to Thailand. But
Can you imagine a situation where you stop traveling?
Yeah, when I die.
It's your plan to just keep going and see as many places. Are you trying to complete the list?
No.
Visit everywhere?
No, because there are some countries that I absolutely... It's not that I won't go to, but there's no point me going to, and I've got no desire to go to, and I'd rather go back to other places and see. Because if you think about what I said at the very start, and that's that, borders are arbitrary. That means that I've been to 100 countries, but in most of those countries, there's places I haven't been that seem interesting. So now I've hit the 100 barrier, there's no reason for me not to go back to certain countries and visit different parts of ones I've been to. Because some of those countries are quite big. For example, Brazil. I have been to Brazil.
I've seen
literally a very small corner of Brazil, because I went to the Iguazu Falls on the Brazil side for a day trip. That's me. That's the entirety of Brazil. I didn't even get stamped into the country, just for the record. because of the.
You look really annoyed by that.
I find it amusing. Whereas technically it's 3 different countries at the same time. Yeah. So yeah, I've been to Brazil. I'm counting Brazil. I have done things in Brazil. I have spent money in Brazil. I have seen Brazil. But I have seen one waterfall in one corner of a very big country. So, there's a whole
So you've
host of.
sketched everything out and now you want to go and
Yeah.
colour it in.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain countries I probably won't ever go back to because I've seen all I've wanted to do, like Paraguay, Monaco. But when I gave if I ever give a list of countries that I have no desire, like least favorite countries, Monaco would probably be high on that list.
I can imagine it doesn't really fit with your whole vibe.
I only went there as a tick-off exercise. Interestingly, it rained for the entire time I was there. There's a theme here.
It seems to follow you around.
I'm British, of course it follows me around. I'm just grateful to be in a country where it doesn't rain. But no, I have no desire to visit every country.
I've certainly spoken before about countries I do intend to visit, not just Bolivia, but also places like Pakistan and Kiribati. But having hit 100 countries, I no longer feel the need to make weirdly illogicalistic trips to fit them in with surrounding nations. I can just dedicate myself more to one country trips and, yes, I guess, spend longer in them, visiting them in more detail so I can see the place as much as it deserves to, rather than, just getting a taster and knowing I might come back in the future one day. I don't know how many countries I'll end up on. I don't imagine it'll be more than 120, to be honest. There's a couple more multi-country trips I want to do, Central America and the bits of West Africa I couldn't do in 2014, for instance. But for the most part, I'm pretty happy just knocking off 1 or 2 every so often. I'm not pressured, and because I've actively no desire to visit them all, it doesn't matter to me so much if I find out that I never get a chance to visit, Myanmar or Mozambique. The world is too large to do everything, and I'm comfortable with that. One day, probably next year now, I'll do a podcast episode on my experiences in the Balkans, and I'll talk then more about both North Macedonia and Albania, and Kosovo, reeling back to earlier in this pod, and why my experiences in them were all different. But here's something to ponder. While it might have been dour and grey, North Macedonia does hold one personal record for me and the way I travel. See if you can imagine what it is. And if you listen to the full recording on Patreon, I tell you. When we were arranging this chat, V asked around for ideas for questions to ask someone who'd been to 100 countries. She has teenagers. We finished up our chat with a couple of questions that could absolutely only come out of the mouths of 14-year-olds.
So shall we move on to some sillier questions now? I've done all the heavy ones to you.
We do like our silly questions.
One of the other most common questions that I got was about toilets. And it was about what is the best toilets in the world? What is the worst toilets in the world? Have you ever been in a toilet where you just wish you'd taken a crap outside instead?
Sadly, I was in a toilet in. We were discussing earlier about colonialism and not wanting to diss a country because of stereotypes, because there are certain countries that have certain stereotypes and we do not want to go into those. The worst toilet I've ever been to was China. It was a block kind of just off the highway, and it looked for all the world like an abandoned building. It was a hole in the ground. There was no toilet paper. The only reason I went into it was because I had no choice about when to go. It was not pleasant. I had to wipe my arse on newspaper.
Oh. I mean, at least you had newspaper.
I didn't. It was in the toilet. It was in the cubicle. God knows what else was. God knows. For the record, I've had some very good toilets in China, and also for the record, I was on a train in India this year, and all the stereotypes we have about Indian trains. This particular train had a toilet that was one of the cleanest I've ever seen. And it had a phone number that you could dial to speak to someone on the train whose job it would be to fix the toilet if it broke.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But yes, this Indian train toilet was actually better than you'd find on, Avanti West Coast. This one actually worked.
Yeah.
I have been to toilets in Dominica and Australia that have had small slots of windows where you just look out and go, oh my God, that's a good view. The one in Australia was actually called the Loo with a View. It's on a beach in Maroochydore, I think, in the
I
Sunshine
can
Coast.
imagine that would be great in the daytime, but a bit
Yes.
scary at night.
Well, so yeah, that had a view of the beach in Maroochydore. The one in Dominica had a view of the rainforest because it was like basically most of what Dominica is. It's a rainforest, and this was at a restaurant up in the hills. So you just got a view out over the rainforest hills, and it was great. It was fantastic, and that was good in the dark. So I've had some very good views from toilets. The worst toilets I've encountered have generally been in British pubs or British sports stadiums. Both of which, because you know what men are like in toilets, and also I don't know how often you've been to a men's toilet, but
Rarely.
in old-fashioned sports stadia and things like that, you don't have individual urinals. You have like the long metal tray. So you've got like sort of 7, 8, 9 of you stood on along the tray and just pissing into the tray.
I will always find urinals deeply strange. I don't know why men have accepted that they've just got piss in front of each other. It's
It's very gay.
Even the Pope shits once a day, I guess. In fairness, it's one of those questions that is actually kind of important, because travel isn't just about posing in sundresses by seafronts or taking videos of vistas from the top of hills. Some of your travels will be spent doing everyday things like waiting for buses, shopping for tweezers, or going to the toilet. And I'm not saying you can judge a country by the quality of its toilets, but they certainly do leave more of a lasting impression on you than you might imagine. I actually don't like squat toilets unless there's a handrail to hold on to, partly for reasons of balance, partly for reasons of sheer spatial awareness, and partly because I don't have a strong enough core to maintain the position for long enough. However, when they're shiny metal or ceramic, with a powerful bidet shower and a thorough flush mechanism, they're probably cleaner and more practical than a Western toilet with the stained and cracked seat and the hard-to-reach places under the rim that are evidently too hard to reach for the average pub landlord. I'm sure I've raved about the handheld bidet showers before, or the bum gun, as a few people here in the UK have called them. So much better than using endless sheets of toilet paper, especially if you need a thorough clean after a piece of dodgy squid from a market stall in 30-degree Cambodia. And my first usage of one, in Dubai airport, made me finally understand why the left hand is taboo in Arabic culture. Because, of course, up until then I was a toilet paper person, and I'm right-handed, so that was the logical hand to use. Whereas with a bum gun, I'm holding that in my dominant hand, which leads my left hand to, as they say, do all the work. If you think it couldn't get any weirder than toilets, think again.
This was a purely hypothetical one.
Yes.
I'm not taking notes. If you had to choose one of your 100 countries to survive a zombie apocalypse in, and I know you're probably going to ask me, what sort of zombies and all sorts of caveats now, but which country do you feel like you could easily survive, well, not easily, but most easily survive a zombie apocalypse?
You would need somewhere that's relatively remote, but also quite well equipped.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time the zombies got to you, half of them would be dead anyway. So on that basis, Mongolia would win. Because if there's one thing that the Mongolians are, it's well equipped for an invasion. Because historically they've been used to doing it
as well, though.
Yes, because it's
purely
awkward to
because
get to.
a greater population is armed.
Yes. Well, yeah, because everyone is armed, because you have to be, because polar bears are not good to meet on a dark street unless you're carrying a gun. And even if you are carrying a gun, the other option would be remote islands.
You've got to get the balance, though, between having people to help you to produce the things that you need, because one human alone can't generally do all of that themselves. We are not items.
I mean,
but also small enough population that you're not going to have infection run through really quickly.
I mean, the cynic of me would also argue somewhere where no one would notice.
Like,
New York.
no one would notice a zombie apocalypse in New York.
Have you been to New York?
I mean, I haven't. And to be fair, I did see a news article a few years ago that made me think that it was a potential zombie apocalypse happening, where somebody was on, I think it was bath salts, and they were like naked on a bridge and trying to eat someone even after they were shot several times and stuff like that. But I'd imagine that you can overlook one or two of those incidents, but when it's happening everywhere, that would be quite difficult to ignore.
It was something you told me once.
Oh God.
I was worrying about how I came across with my own foibles and presentations.
Yeah, and I said no one's paying any attention.
You said no one would pay any attention to me, and also specifically London, I would not be the weirdest thing they'd seen that morning.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So, a very populated, busy, vibrant, highly mixed urban environment where people wouldn't notice and people wouldn't care as long as, they paid for their sausage roll.
Look, we can ignore you eating people, but we cannot ignore you not tipping the waitress.
There's a meme that I saw on Tumblr. Well, I didn't see it on Tumblr because I'm not on Tumblr. Don't know why. Tumblr is my environment. But I saw it on Instagram. But it was about a story about New Orleans taxi drivers didn't go to certain parts of New Orleans because of ghosts.
Yeah.
The problem wasn't that there were ghosts. The problem was that they were called out. Yeah, they were called out to places and then didn't get paid for it. Because
it feels like if that's happening often enough in some area, we should all be paying a tax while we're alive for free cab rides after we're dead.
Yeah, I mean that's just an extension of the whole stick coins in your mouth to pay the ferryman. And these days it's stick a debit card in your mouth to pay the Uber driver.
I fully intend to be buried with some dog treats just in case I do meet Cerberus.
The Tumblr screenshot specifically says, taxi companies have recurring problems of picking up ghosts in those areas who are not aware that they are dead, and then disappearing from the cab before reaching the destination, and therefore stiffing the driver on the fare, which is a somewhat niche problem that probably doesn't come up very often in driver training. I can't help but feel someone has probably already made a movie about a zombie apocalypse in New York failing because, well, it's New York. That said, every time I hear the phrase zombie apocalypse, my default is Shaun of the Dead, set in the London suburb of Crouch End. But, as you heard us discuss, that's got similar vibes. The final question asked has a similar irreverent vibe.
So, you're wandering through the countryside, minding your business as you do, and aliens appear. And they say, no, we've been looking for you. We need a representative for Earth. We need you to pick a country to represent Earth at the, I don't know, Space Games. Who are you picking and why?
I wouldn't pick a country.
All right.
I would pick a city.
Okay.
There is only one city in the world that is diverse enough to encompass the entirety of human existence. One city that is wild enough, that has everything. It has all of the food, it has all of the culture, it has all of the symbolism. You can basically, all of the political opinions. One of those places where you can just walk down the street and just know that you can find any hobby, at least in theory, no one's going to be climbing mountains. You could have any hobby, any pastime, any political persuasion will all exist. You know where the city is?
I mean, from that description, I'm thinking you're going to say New York again.
I am indeed going to say New York again. If you're going to invite aliens to go, this is the pinnacle of this is humanity in a nutshell, then I don't think there is anywhere on the planet that encompasses humanity in all of its diverse forms, in all of its diverse ways, in all of its habits, in all of its hobbies, in all of its cultures, in all of its opinions, in all of its food, than New York does.
I mean, I might advise the aliens to stay off the subway in New York.
Oh no, absolutely not. Absolutely
You think
not.
that's a definite part of the human experience?
Absolutely, it's a very definite part of the human experience. If you want to know what humans are like, pretty much everything. It's not everything in the world, but it's, of all the places in the world, it's probably the one that encompasses most of it, and that includes the subway. Everything is in New York. Everyone is in New York, in representative of the world. It's like you can probably find a native citizen of every country in the world there. Someone tried it with London. I think they missed out on like 3 or 4 countries, but I think you could probably find some representative of every country in the world there. You could probably find some representative of more languages in the world there than anywhere else of its size in the
And
world.
probably also all genders, sexualities, various different disabilities, like all that sort of thing you could probably find in New York as well.
Yes, absolutely. There's a reason
And
why
various religions.
there's a reason why New York has so many scenes. It's because it's got so many
Mm.
people to have scenes. Yes, New York is one of those places where, Laura derived me with the fact that I've not spent very long there. I've been there a few times, but only for like passing through one-nighters essentially. So I've had quite a few days there, but not in any coherent form.
As places go, it's never been somewhere that really appeals to me.
You
Just
have to,
because I feel like it's a bigger, busier London, and I already find London too big and too busy.
you have to like cities.
Mm.
And I think it helps if you like people, but I don't
Yeah.
necessarily think that's
don't-
as important as appreciating the fact that people exist.
Yeah. I don't mind people in smaller doses, but I don't like big crowds of people. Don't like feeling that you've got to keep moving. In London, I feel like you're not allowed to stop and look around you at any point because you've just got to keep going with this big sort of herd of people. And that's the direction you're going now. And you don't have time to sort of stand and be lost for a minute or anything like that because you've got to move. And I feel like New York would be very like that, you know?
Yes.
Whereas I'm a wanderer. I like to mosey. I like to stare into space and notice things. And that just, it isn't very conducive to traversing London.
I mean, I currently live in a village of a couple of thousand people max, so...
So what have we learnt this episode? I've been to 100 countries, but no one's quite sure what a country is. So maybe I've been to 101, or 105, or some other number depending on your criteria. Visiting that much of the world makes you more reflective and more respectful, but you still have to work at it and treat every place as a new lesson in humility and world politics. Almost everything is edible, but some things probably shouldn't be. But if you need to, there's always a toilet to visit that might be better than your expectations. And New York is the best place to hang out during a zombie apocalypse or an alien invasion. And in either case, give it a few months, and they'll have opened their own restaurant on West 84th Street. Well, that's about all for this pod. Tune in next time for another adventure beyond the brochure. Until then, consider this quote of Mozart. A man of ordinary talent will always be ordinary, whether he travels or not. But a man of superior talent, which I cannot deny myself to be without being impitious, will go to pieces if he remains forever in the same place. Mozart was very full of himself. And if you're feeling off colour, keep on getting better. Thank you for listening to this episode of Travel Tales from Beyond the Brochure. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, tell your friends that I rocked your socks. If you wear socks while listening to my pod, that's your call, not mine. And don't forget to leave a review on your podcast site of choice. You can tweet me at RTWBarefoot, and I'm the same name on YouTube, Blue Sky and Pinterest, or you can find me as Barefoot Backpacker on Instagram, Discord and Facebook. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletter, and if you really like what I do, you can slip me the cost of a beer through my Patreon in return for access to rare extra content. Travel Tales from Beyond the Brochure was written, presented, edited and produced by the Barefoot Backpacker. The theme music is Walking Barefoot on Grass Bonus by Kai Engel, which is available via the Free Music Archive and used under the Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International License. Show notes are available on my website, barefoot-backpacker.com. Until next time, have safe journeys. Bye for now.